These days, it's almost unheard of for an NBA team to let a star or superstar leave in free agency. Teams just throw max contracts around because they're desperate to keep their guys, even if it means massively overpaying and destroying their own future. But what happens when a team refuses to pay fair value, insults their player with a lowball offer, and then has to sit back and watch him turn into a star somewhere else? That's the nightmare we're looking at today. 6 NBA teams that cheaped out on their players and paid the price right away. Some teams thought they were being smart by not re-signing, by trading too soon, or by just dumping guys to create cap space. In fact, one example even involves a team trying to clear enough room just to keep Shaquille O'Neal happy. Before we dive in, though, big shout out to the sponsor of this video, Raycon. I'm not in school anymore, but I still love the back-to-school shopping vibe I used to have with my parents. And if you are going back, Raycon's essential open earbuds are a must-have for anyone. They let you stay aware of your surroundings while still giving you crisp, clear sound that competes with the top brands but at half the price. They're light, super comfy to wear all day, and best of all, they come with a 30-day happiness guarantee, so if you hate them, you get your money back. I personally use mine constantly, while eating, cleaning, or walking around the block, and they never bother me. They also have multi-point connectivity so you can switch between devices easily, plus 36 hours of total battery life including 8 hours in the buds and a 28-hour charging case. Click the link in. Check the description below or head to raycon.com/hoopsopen to grab 20% off. That's raycon.com/hoopsopen. Now let's talk about the Orlando Magic. Back in 1996, the Orlando Sentinel newspaper ran a poll asking fans if Shaquille O'Neal, the face of the franchise, was worth $115 million. About 5,000 people voted, and most of them basically said, "Nope, he's not worth that kind of money." The poll was flat out ridiculous because at that time, no NBA player had ever seen a deal close to that amount. $115 million was unheard of in the league. Honestly, if you ran the same poll about Michael Jordan back then, most casual fans still would have said no. Basically, the Orlando Sentinel pulled off the 1990s version of clickbait rage farming, and it blew up nationally, with Shaq taking the disrespect personally. The Sentinel had a long history of bashing the Magic with negative headlines, so it wasn't just Shaq who was sick of them. But what exactly did the Magic put on the table? Reports are all over the place. Some sources say the Magic offered him 4 years and $54 million, which is pathetic, while others claim they went with 6 years and $95 million. Either way, both numbers were embarrassingly low. For comparison, guys like Alonzo Mourning and Juwan Howard had just secured 7-year, $105 million deals. Shaq was miles better than both of them, so he clearly deserved more. And despite what people like to say, that infamous Orlando Sentinel poll wasn't actually the reason the Magic lowballed him. I mean, it's insane to think trusting a newspaper poll to make the biggest decision in the history of a young franchise was beyond stupid. The Magic hesitated because they weren't sure if Shaq was really their future. Yes, he had just carried them to the finals the year before, but they had been swept by the Chicago Bulls, and Shaq's focus and effort were under fire. In fact, it was the 3rd straight postseason sweep for the Magic. The team knew Shaq had the tools to become the most dominant center ever, but they thought he lacked the drive and hunger to get there. And then you had the DeVos family, who were notoriously cheap. The Magic were still a relatively new expansion franchise, so committing more than $100 million to one player scared them. Meanwhile, the Los Angeles Lakers swooped in, offering Shaq a 7-year, $121 million deal, which he gladly signed. The Magic panicked and tried to match it, but it was already over. They lost their franchise cornerstone for nothing, only to watch him win 3 straight championships in LA. Looking back, many believe Shaq was leaving anyway. Even if Orlando had paid him fairly, he already had his eyes on Los Angeles. He wanted the Hollywood lifestyle, and on top of that, he felt Penny Hardaway was stealing the spotlight in Orlando. The Magic seemed to be treating Penny like the true face of the franchise instead of him. Either way, Shaq probably walks regardless, but the lowballing? That was the final insult. Now let's move on to the Minnesota Timberwolves. Chauncey Billups became known as the heart of the Detroit Pistons, but his road there was a mess. As the 3rd pick of the 1997 draft, Chauncey Billups needed time to figure out how to use his skills in the NBA. Drafted by the Boston Celtics, he got dumped midway through his rookie season. For a top prospect like him, that kind of quick trade is almost unheard of. But he had an ego problem and clashed with teammates, so his career started shaky. Fast forward to the 2002 offseason. Billups had spent the last 2 years with the Timberwolves and just broke out. He played all 82 games, showed off a deadly 3-point shot, and most importantly, grew up. The selfish label was gone. With veteran mentors around him in Minnesota, Billups completely shifted his mindset. Over the season, he turned into a real leader, something the Wolves badly needed since they couldn't get over the playoff hump. Sam Mitchell, better known later as a head coach, was actually Billups' teammate on that Wolves squad. He even admitted, "People said Chauncey was selfish and only cared about shooting, but suddenly he's asking me non-stop questions. That's not the same guy." Billups himself said Boston never actually taught him how to be a point guard. In Minnesota, though, he finally learned the position and became exactly what Kevin Garnett needed by his side. The two formed a strong friendship and Billups looked like the perfect point guard fit. On paper, it sounds like it should have been a no-brainer to re-sign Chauncey Billups, especially since it was obvious he was only going to keep getting better. He actually wanted to stay in Minnesota long-term, but the Wolves refused to commit. Instead, they pinned their hopes on Terrell Brandon returning from knee surgery. Brandon was a former All-Star with more experience, so the Wolves assumed he'd be their starter again. But the injury was so bad he never played another NBA game. By betting on him, the Wolves let Billups walk for nothing. And honestly, this was just one of the countless screw-ups from that cursed era. Coming off his breakout season, Billups had options, and the Detroit Pistons swooped in with a 6-year, $34 million deal. That was a bargain for a player who would go on to lead them to 6 straight trips to the Eastern Conference Finals, 2 finals appearances, 1 championship, and a finals MVP. It ended up being one of the most important free agency signings in NBA history. And the Wolves? They didn't even try to keep him. The worst part is they never gave him an offer at all. This video is about lowball offers, but come on, offering 0 is basically the ultimate lowball. Now let's move on to the Phoenix Suns. The 2004-05 Suns were legendary. It was Steve Nash's first year back in Phoenix, and he instantly turned them from a lottery mess into the best regular season team in the NBA. They had the top record in the league. That squad was loaded. A young Amari Stoudemire, Shawn Marion in his prime, and a 23-year-old Joe Johnson who exploded next to Nash. But things took a crazy turn when the ball wound up in the hands of Richardson. At this point, Joe Johnson wasn't an all-star yet, but anyone watching him play could see the upside. When his contract expired, he became one of the hottest free agents of the 2005 offseason. At first, Johnson wanted to stay in Phoenix and was even willing to take a team-friendly deal if it meant competing for a championship. But when he sat down with new owner Robert Sarver, who had just bought the Suns in 2004, things went downhill fast. Johnson asked for a 6-year deal worth around $50 million. That's it. For a future All-Star, that was beyond reasonable, arguably a steal. But Sarver brushed him off without hesitation. Meanwhile, other teams were chasing Johnson hard, especially the Atlanta Hawks, who promised him he'd be their #1 option. Since Johnson was a restricted free agent, the Suns technically could have matched any offer. But because his relationship with Sarver had soured so badly, Johnson flat out asked him not to match Atlanta's offer. Sarver agreed, and just like that, the Suns lost a core piece of their future. Decades later, Sarver, who almost never admits fault, finally confessed that letting Johnson walk was his biggest regret as an owner. He even said, "I beat myself up about that one. Because with Joe, we could have extended our title window for years." And he wasn't lying. Without Johnson, the Suns had a much harder path to a title without Joe Johnson. In the end, they never got it done. Now let's move to the Detroit Pistons. Just like Chauncey Billups, Ben Wallace bounced around before finding his true home in Detroit. And when you think about this Pistons era, nothing is more iconic than his afro and the way he played with insane toughness as an undersized center. He took on challenges even the greatest big men in NBA history couldn't handle. Wallace wasn't just a role player, he was the soul of the franchise, and everyone assumed he'd retire as a Piston. He was Detroit basketball. But after their embarrassing 2006 playoff exit, Wallace hit free agency, and suddenly the Pistons weren't so sure about him. His defense was elite, but offensively he was a black hole. GM Joe Dumars offered him 4 years, $48 million, justifying it by saying the Pistons needed cap space for more scoring and creativity. The team already had defense locked up at every position, even without Wallace. What they lacked was shooters and playmakers, so Dumars decided not to pay him like a cornerstone. Wallace tested the market, and the Chicago Bulls swooped in with 4 years, $60 million. He took it. Ironically, the Pistons and Bulls met in the 2007 playoffs, with Detroit winning the series. But despite another trip to the conference finals, their once unbreakable defense started looking vulnerable. And then came LeBron James' legendary Game 5 masterpiece, off balance, behind the back, forcing overtime, and against the Cavaliers, LeBron James ripped the Pistons apart, scoring 25 straight points. Mostly easy drives straight to the rim. Without Ben Wallace anchoring the paint, Detroit's defense had a giant hole that no one could cover. That was the moment Joe Dumars realized he blew it. If Wallace had still been there, no way LeBron goes off like that. The Pistons had beaten that same Cavs team the year before with Wallace, and given how awful the rest of Cleveland's roster was, losing this series was flat-out embarrassing. Dumars was dead wrong. The Pistons absolutely needed Big Ben. Now let's move to the Oklahoma City Thunder. What else needs to be said? This was a young squad with 3 superstars barely in their early 20s, fully capable of becoming the next NBA dynasty. But we all know how this story ends. After losing in the 2012 finals, James Harden was due for an extension, and the Thunder had a chance to lock in their big 3 for years. Instead, negotiations went south. It's hard to put all the blame on GM Sam Presti since ownership refused to pay luxury tax, but he still mismanaged the situation. OKC's max offer was around 4 years, $55 million, while Harden wanted 4 years, $60 million. That's a tiny $5 million gap for a future MVP. What people forget is Harden never even rejected OKC's offer. He was actually still considering it. But Presti panicked. Afraid that dragging things out would be risky, he rushed into a decision before Harden had time to even. Presti didn't even let Harden reach an agreement before rushing into a trade, scared the market might dry up. The deal sent Harden to Houston for Kevin Martin, Jeremy Lamb, and a few picks, one of which turned into Steven Adams. Martin lasted just 1 year, Lamb was a total bust, and while Adams became a solid role player, none of that compares to what Harden became. Some people say Harden's weak performance in the finals was why OKC refused to give him the extra money. But the truth is the team's cheap ownership just didn't want to pay luxury tax. Others argue Harden wanted to be a franchise star and might have left anyway. But it's hard not to see this as a blown dynasty. The young Thunder core never even got a chance to reach its peak. Now let's talk about the Dallas Mavericks. In the 2004 offseason, Mark Cuban faced a tough choice. Dallas had been a consistent playoff team with their trio of Dirk Nowitzki, Michael Finley, and Steve Nash, but they couldn't get over the hump. Cuban adored Nash, so the idea of letting him walk wasn't easy, but he had his reasons. Nash had just played one of his worst seasons in years, he was about to hit 30 with nagging back problems, and Cuban wanted to go all in on building around Dirk. He didn't think Nash was the right point guard to pair with him. Honestly, those concerns weren't crazy at the time. Before joining Phoenix, Nash wasn't even close to an MVP-level player. Cuban still offered 5 years, $51 million, which was big considering the cap was only about $40 million, meaning Nash would take up a full quarter of it. But then the Suns swooped in with a massive 6-year, $66 million offer, and Nash jumped at it. He thought about staying in Dallas, but Phoenix sold him on their vision of a fast-paced, high-scoring system built around young, athletic guys running beside him. That became the famous 7 seconds or less offense, and Nash was the engine that made it possible. It unlocked a side of his game nobody saw coming. To make it sting even more, Nash's first year in Phoenix included a playoff showdown with Dallas, and he absolutely destroyed them. He went off for 30 points and 12 assists per game on ridiculous efficiency, the best series of his entire career. Cuban admitted later he regretted letting Nash walk, but in truth, it worked out better for both sides. The Mavericks were one of the slowest teams in the league, built around Dirk Nowitzki's half-court style, and that system never gave Nash the freedom to be great. In Phoenix, he had it, and the rest is history. Anyway, that's the story, folks. 6 NBA teams that lowballed a star player and immediately paid the price. Now I want to hear from you. Which of these situations do you think was the dumbest? And can you name any other team that made the same mistake? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching, and as always, I'll catch you next time. Peace.